The Apex Grappling Academy was less a dojo and more a temple to the self. Its pristine white mats were framed by walls of polished steel and glass, and the air, thick with the scent of clean sweat and expensive mat cleaner, hummed with the electric current of contained aggression. It was a place where confidence was currency, and the color of your belt was your credit score. Into this arena of peacocks and predators, she walked. Her name was Alara, and she was invisible. She moved with a quiet economy that rendered her unseen, her presence as subtle as a change in the air pressure before a storm. Her GI was a faded, washed-out gray, the kind of garment that spoke of countless hours of use, not of a brand sponsorship. It was clean, meticulously so, but it hung on her small frame without the tailored crispness of the others, marking her as an outsider. She bowed at the edge of the mats, a gesture of respect that was both profound and utterly missed by those who mattered here. Two of those who mattered were Marcus and Leo, the Academy's reigning black belts. Marcus was a physical specimen, a sculpture of muscle and ego clad in a jet-black GI, adorned with the logos of every supplement company that would have him. Leo was his shadow, a smaller, leaner version who echoed Marcus's laughter and amplified his scorn. They saw Alara immediately, her quiet simplicity a stark offensive contrast to their carefully cultivated image. "Well, well, Leo," Marcus boomed, his voice designed to carry across the expanse of mats. "Look what we have here. Did someone get lost on their way to the yoga studio?" A ripple of sycophantic laughter followed from their small circle of disciples. The other students, the silent witnesses, averted their eyes, some with a flicker of pity, others with the practiced indifference of those who know not to step into the path of the alpha. If you believe that true strength is not what you show the world but what you carry inside it, then subscribe to our channel. Because the story of this quiet woman will remind you that the deepest rivers make the least noise. Lyra's face remained a placid lake, showed no sign of having heard, or if she had, of caring. She found an empty space at the very back of the room, far from the central stage where Marcus held court. She began to stretch, her movements fluid and deliberate, each one flowing into the next with a grace that was entirely her own. There was a story in the way she moved, a history in the precise articulation of her joints. But it was written in a language no one here could read. No one, perhaps, except for one. Master Kenji, the owner and head sensei of the academy, stood near. The edge of the mats, his arms crossed over his chest. He was a man in his late 60s, with a face like a weathered map, and eyes that held the calm, observant patience of a deep forest predator. He had seen Marcus's display and Elara's non-reaction. His gaze lingered on the woman in the gray. He saw past the faded fabric, saw the perfect alignment of her spine as she stretched. The subtle tension in her hands that spoke not of nervousness, but of readiness. He saw a focus so absolute it seemed to bend the very air around her. He said nothing, simply clapped his hands together, the sound sharp and definitive, calling the class to order. "Line up," he commanded. As the students scrambled into their rows, organized by the hierarchy of their belts, Alara found her place. At the very end of the line, behind the newest white belts. Marcus and Leo, at the front of the line, glanced back, a shared smirk of derision on their faces. To them she had just confirmed their assessment. She was nothing, a nobody. Warm-up drills began. Master Kenji watched her, and for the first time in a long time, he felt a spark of intrigue. The academy had become a place of ego, of performance. But this woman, she was something else entirely. She was a question mark in a room full of exclamation points. Weeks bled into one another, turning into a month, then two. Alara became a fixture. At the Apex Grappling Academy, as constant and as silent as the polished steel beams that held up the roof, routine never varied. She was the first to arrive, her quiet footsteps echoing in the empty dojo before the morning light had fully broken. She was the last to leave, long after the boisterous laughter of Marcus's crew had faded into the night. After every single session, she would take a cloth and meticulously wipe down a small section of the mat. Not just her own training space, but a little beyond it, a small, solitary act of humility and respect that went completely unnoticed. Her silence was a fortress. She never initiated conversation, and when spoken to, her answers were brief, polite, and offered nothing of herself. This quiet dignity began to gnaw at Marcus. His position at the top of the academy's food chain was maintained by a constant diet of fear and adulation. He was the sun, and he expected every other student to be a planet orbiting him. Alara, however, was a rogue comet, traversing her own path, seemingly immune to his gravitational pull. Her indifference was more insulting than any retort, began to escalate his campaign of mockery, his comments growing more pointed, his taunts more direct. During a lesson on guard passing, he demonstrated a move with theatrical violence, then looked directly at Alara. "You see, Sensei," he announced, "this is what separates the warriors from the hobbyists. You need that fire, that killer instinct. Some people just don't have it. They're just wasting space, taking up air that a real fighter could be breathing." The other students shuffled their feet uncomfortably. The barb was so direct, so cruel, that even his usual cronies felt a pang of unease. Master Kenji, who was adjusting a white belt's grip, paused. He turned his head slowly, his gaze unblinking. "Instinct, Marcus," he said, his voice quiet yet carrying to every corner of the room, "is not always a bonfire. Sometimes it is an ember, glowing in the darkness, waiting for the right moment to ignite. The deadliest predators are often silent until the moment of the strike." The words hung in the air, a clear yet subtle rebuke. Marcus flushed, chagrined at being corrected in front of the class. But his arrogance quickly reasserted itself. He mistook the lesson for a generic platitude, not the specific warning it was. Master Kenji's eyes, however, were on Alara. He saw what Marcus could not. He saw the faint silvery line of a scar that traced its way from her temple into her hairline, a detail you could only notice if you were truly looking. He saw the collection of hardened calluses on her knuckles, not the kind you get from lifting weights, but the kind you get from impact. Most of all, he saw her eyes. They were calm, yes, but they were not vacant. They were the eyes of a watchman on a high tower, seeing everything, processing everything, missing nothing. He knew with a certainty that settled deep in his bones that this woman was no hobbyist. The storm finally broke during a live rolling session. Marcus, still smarting from Kenji's words, decided to force the issue. He was paired with a much larger but less skilled brown belt and was toying with him. He saw Alara drilling nearby with a lanky, nervous blue belt. In a move that was far too deliberate to be an accident, Marcus swept his partner with excessive force, sending the large man tumbling directly into Ilar's path. The blue belt yelped and jumped back, but Alara simply shifted her weight, a minute, almost imperceptible adjustment, and the falling man slid past her without contact. Marcus swaggered over, a false mask of concern on his face. "My mistake. Hope I didn't startle you." His voice dripped with condescending sweetness. He was trying to provoke a reaction, any reaction. He wanted a flicker of fear, a spark of anger. He received nothing. Alara simply helped the brown belt to his feet, gave him a short, reassuring nod, and then turned back to her own partner to resume the drill. Her face was an unreadable, tranquil slate, but as she turned away, her eyes met Master Kenji's from across the room for a fraction of a second, and in that fleeting moment, he saw it. Not anger, not fear. He saw the quiet patience of a bomb disposal expert. He saw the calm before the storm, and he knew it was only a matter of time. The air in the Apex Grappling Academy was different on King of the Mat Day. The usual tension of training was replaced with a thicker, more suspenseful atmosphere, like the charged silence before a duel. It was a day of reckoning, an open sparring event where rank was temporarily suspended and challenges could be issued and answered on the glaring, white stage of the central mat. It was a day for settling scores and cementing hierarchies. Marcus, it was a day of performance. After making short, brutal work of a brave but outmatched purple belt and then a hesitant brown belt, he stood alone in the center of the mat. He was breathing heavily, more for show than from exertion, his chest puffed out. The room was his audience, and he was their star. He basked in the mixture of fear and admiration from the students lining the walls. But his performance wasn't over. He stalked over to the small table where Master Kenji sat, grabbed the microphone used for announcements, and turned back to face the crowd. His eyes, glittering with arrogance, scanned the faces before him. "That was a nice warm-up," he began, his voice amplified, filling the gym. "But I'm looking for a real challenge, someone with some fire, someone who isn't afraid to step up." His gaze swept past the other black belts, past the rows of lower ranks, and landed with the inevitability of a hawk spotting its prey. On Alara. She was sitting on the floor, leaning against the wall, observing the proceedings with her usual quiet intensity. "How about you?" Marcus's voice was a whip crack in the sudden silence. "In the gray. You've been so quiet these past few months, just watching from the shadows. Let's see if there's anything behind all that silence. Come on, let's dance." Collective sharp intake of breath swept through the room. This was it. The culmination of weeks of targeted scorn. It was a public execution, a no-win scenario designed for maximum humiliation. To refuse the challenge was to be branded a coward forever in the Academy's unforgiving social structure. To accept seemed like a fool's errand, a lamb willingly walking into the slaughterhouse. Every eye in the room swiveled from the smug, triumphant face of Marcus to the small, still figure of Alara. For a long moment, she didn't move. The silence stretched, becoming heavy, unbearable. Then slowly, she lifted her head. Her eyes met not Marcus's, but Master Kenji's. The old sensei's face was unreadable, a mask of ancient calm. He looked at this woman, this enigma he had been observing for months. He saw the challenge, the disrespect, the boiling tension, and he made a choice. He gave a single, slow, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't an order, it was permission. It was a key turning in a lock. Ilara's posture changed. It was a subtle shift, but the entire room felt it. She rose to her feet. In one fluid, seamless motion, with her eyes still on her sensei, she gave a short, respectful bow. Then she turned and walked towards the mat. She didn't speak a word. Her footsteps were silent. She stepped over the boundary and faced Marcus, her expression as calm as a deep, still pond. As the referee motioned for them to begin, she tightened the knot on her worn belt. The contrast was almost poetic. The hulking black belt, radiating aggressive confidence, versus the unassuming woman in the faded GI, a portrait of serene composure. The bell chimed. Marcus lunged. He moved with explosive force, intending to end it quickly, to overwhelm her with raw power and humiliate her with a swift submission. He shot in for a takedown, his arms reaching to encircle her legs. The world tilted on its axis. In a blur of motion that defied physics, Ilara vanished. She didn't retreat, she flowed. Shifting her weight onto her back foot, she used his own momentum against him, her hand gripping his collar, her foot finding his hip. It was a transition so smooth, so impossibly fast, that most in the room didn't even see it happen. One moment Marcus was lunging forward, a predator closing in. The next, he was on his back, a look of utter bewilderment on his face. With Alara coiled around his arm, her hips applying devastating pressure to his elbow. It was a deep, perfect armbar. She didn't wrench it or jerk it. She simply held it at the breaking point, a silent, undeniable statement. The choice was his. A strangled cry of shock and pain escaped his lips. He tapped, frantically, furiously. He slapped his hand against her leg. Tap, tap, tap. The match had lasted for seconds. A profound, deafening silence descended upon the Apex Grappling Academy. It was a silence born of shock, a collective cognitive dissonance that left every single student, from the newest white belt to the most seasoned brown belt, utterly speechless. They had just witnessed the impossible. Their son, their unbeatable champion, had been extinguished in less time than it took to draw a breath. Marcus scrambled to his knees, his face a maelstrom of confusion, rage, and a dawning, horrifying humiliation. "Fluke," he snarled, the word a ragged gasp. That was a lucky fluke. He got to his feet, his eyes wild, and glared at Alara, who was already standing, her posture relaxed, as if nothing had happened. Master Kenji, his face still a stone mask, simply said one word. Again. The command was soft, yet it echoed with the weight of an iron decree. Marcus let out a roar of frustration and charged, all technique abandoned in favor of pure, vengeful fury. He threw a clumsy, haymaker-like punch, a move of desperation, not skill. For Alara, it was like the world had slowed down. She saw the rage in his eyes, the tightening of his shoulder, the telegraph of his intent. She moved not away from the force, but into it, flowing around his attack like water around a stone. Her body became a conduit, absorbing his reckless energy and redirecting it. With an elegance that was almost hypnotic, she ducked under his arm, established a grip on his back, and in one continuous liquid motion dragged him to the mat. Before his back had even fully settled, she was already there, a gray shadow blanketing him. The transition was flawless, a masterclass in efficiency that left no gaps, no space for escape. She moved from the takedown to side control, then to his back, her hooks sinking in with practiced ease. Her forearm slid under his chin, her other hand locking onto her bicep, perfect rear naked choke. Her technique wasn't just good, it was something else entirely. It was brutally perfect. It lacked the theatricality of sport jiu-jitsu. It was the distilled essence of combat, designed for one purpose only: absolute control and submission. She didn't squeeze with anger. She simply applied pressure, a steady, inexorable constriction that cut off the blood to his brain. He was given a choice, once again in the silent language of the mats: tap or go to sleep. For a terrifying second, his pride fought against his survival instinct. But as the world began to fade to a pinprick of light, he surrendered. He tapped frantically on her arm, a desperate drumming plea. Alara released the hold instantly, disengaged and stood up. Then, to the utter astonishment of everyone watching, she extended a hand to help him up. Her expression was not one of triumph or gloating. It was neutral. It was the face of someone who had just completed a task. Marcus, gasping for air and for his shattered pride, stared at her hand. He looked at her face, and for the first time, he saw past the faded GI and the quiet demeanor. He saw a depth he couldn't comprehend, a strength that was so far beyond his own it was like comparing a candle to a star. The dojo remained entombed in silence.
Oh, yes.
Leo's jaw was slack, his face a pale mask of disbelief. The silent witnesses were no longer just observers. They were converts, their perceptions of strength and status irrevocably shattered.
Out.
Into this vacuum of sound, Master Kenji finally rose and stepped onto the mat, walked to the center, his presence commanding the absolute attention of everyone in the room. He looked down at Marcus, who was now kneeling, his head bowed. A black belt, Kenji began, his voice calm but resonant, is a symbol of a journey. It is not a destination. It is not a crown to be worn, but a tool to be honed. Have mistaken the symbol for the substance. You saw a simple GI, and you assumed a simple practitioner. You judged the book by its plain cover, and you never once thought to read the pages within. He then turned his serene gaze to Alara. The entire room held its breath. Alara, he said gently, would you mind telling the class where you learned to move like that? Alara looked at her sensei, then at the sea of stunned faces.
No.
She finally spoke, her voice soft but clear, carrying easily in the stillness. For 12 years, she said simply, I was a combatives instructor for the armies. Special forces. Jiu-jitsu was just part of the job. A collective gasp, sharp and audible, rippled through the academy. The final puzzle piece clicked into place. The scar, the calloused knuckles, the unnerving calm, the devastating efficiency. Wasn't just a jiu-jitsu practitioner. She was a warrior, a professional who had walked through fires they could not even imagine. And she had been hiding in plain sight among them all along. Marcus looked up at her, the last vestiges of his arrogance. Crumbling into dust, he saw her now. Saw the quiet discipline forged in a crucible of life and death. He saw a humility born not of weakness, but of profound, unshakable strength. Slowly, painfully, He pushed himself to his feet and gave her a deep, formal bow from the waist, a bow of true, hard-won respect. "Oh, Sue," he whispered, "I am sorry." Ilara simply bowed back, a gesture of acceptance and grace. In that moment, the entire culture of the Apex Grappling Academy shifted on its axis. The currency of ego was declared bankrupt. True mastery, the narrator's voice concludes, is never loud. It doesn't need to announce itself with bright colors or boastful words. It is worn not around the waist, but deep within the soul. Ilara taught them all a lesson that day that went far beyond any submission, that the most formidable person in any room is often the one you see last. And that respect is earned not by the symbol of your rank, but by the quiet truth of your character. The final shot is of Ilara, a few days later, patiently showing a new technique to the same nervous blue belt from before. A small, genuine smile finally gracing her lips.